I guess we'll get this thing going. Oh, another app. Okay. Hi. Welcome to Word Games, the art of writing for video games. This would be a great panel. My name is Alan Hunter. I am a writer for a company called Smart Bomb Interactive. Most of the kids' games are made properly with a game called Animal Town. So if any of you either like games for kids or if you have kids, you may have heard of it. And then I'll just have everybody introduce themselves, who they are, what they do, and then since it's obviously about video games, we're going to have them mention their favorite video game. And so in answer to that question, the obvious answer is, am I not loud enough? Am I loud enough now? Sorry, okay, you have to be close, I'm sorry. My favorite video game would be the Super Nintendo Classic Chrono Trigger because exactly. And pass it on to you.
Well, if I could answer that question correctly here. I'm Corinne Lewis, and I run the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program at the University of Utah. I have several of the students with me. Honestly. And I also teach game writing at the U. I'm the one person here who does not professionally video games, but we do have a graduate degree in writing, so that's why that has me be here.
And those who can't do, teach.
That's right.
It's going to be that kind of thing.
Great. Oh, sorry. I'm scared. Alright. Well, my normal response to that is psycho. It's probably not true anymore, but it's a good one.
It was a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Atkins. I'm not talking loud enough, so I'll do this. I also work at the University of Utah currently with Corinne. I co-teach one of the writing classes there. Prior to that, I was at EA, where I wrote as a producer and writer for the Littlest Pet Shop series of games. Go Pet Shop.
Yeah!
And then I did a lot of writing with Sims. And then I was like, yes! And then I write on the side as a consultant. Prior to that, I worked in the film business for about 10 years.
Ask her what movie she wrote.
No. Yeah, exactly. Hey, what movie did you write? I worked on 5 films. I was the assistant to a director, and I contributed a lot of writing. I was never credited. If you want to work in the film industry and write, learn to say that. But my favorite video game, I think, that started it all, would be Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, Twisted Metal.
I'm Jared Evans. I work at Ninja Bee Games, and most of the professional game writing I've done is on the World of Tetris game. My people. But particularly the Curse of the Zombiesaurus and the Sugar Spice the Not So Nice DLCs. I've worked on a couple of things there too. Before working at Ninja Bee, I was an English major. So there's my English majors. Great.
I think we all actually are English.
Because you can sort of make money. Yay. Now hold on to that hope. I find the favorite game question so hard, but probably Mass Effect. Yeah.
And that's pretty appropriate for the panel that we're at. So I mean, we have a lot of stuff that we could talk about, but since you guys are all here guys and gals are all here to hear from us, what if we open it up to some starter questions and we'll see what happens from there. So, anybody have anything that's burning in your mind?
Yeah. What's your process?
Process.
Yeah. A little bit of your process.
Me personally? Okay, so he said, what is my process? So at Smart Bomb, I'm fortunate, well, you could call it fortunate in that I am the only writer on the project. So my process kind of gets to be whatever I want it to be, but that is not often the case. Very rarely will there be a game that actually has one writer often is the case, especially as you get into more AAA games, there's going to be, you have games like that that have like, it was like 32 credited writers or something like that. And so my process personally, one of the things that is important is that our game is geared for younger kids. Our target demographic is like 8 to 11. So this is going to sound silly, but one of my processes is one of the parts of my process is watching like DuckTales and old TV, because DuckTales is awesome, and watching TV shows and playing games that are made for kids. And then also I have like 10 or 12 nieces and nephews that I talk to on like a weekly basis to find out what they like. One of the hardest things I'm realizing is that apparently kids don't use the same slang that I use as a kid. Apparently the word rad is no longer rad, which is sad for me. So after I've gleaned information, so let's say in our game we have these adventures, or they're basically quests, right, that kids can go on with their animals, and they have to defeat these things called the Phantoms, which are these little things. And so the way it works in our company is that we'll sit down with a kickoff meeting, and we'll sit down with our design director, and he'll say, okay, here's kind of the rough outline of what this adventure is going to be. They're going to, animals are going to go into this place, and they're going to get told that the Phantoms are polluting the water, so they have to go and they have to plug up all the corks, or plug up all the pipes with corks to save the water, and then after that they can progress back into the caves where they can rescue some animals. And so it's kind of a very rough outline, and on the whiteboard we just have squares with arrows going. This is going to look like this. And that meeting is me, the designers, a lot of the artists, animators, environmentalists, and then at that point we kind of break it down. We say, okay, who needs to do what? Adam, you need to go and you need to create dialogue for all of these NPCs that are going around. You have to create I guess it's like signage, right? Like, what does the kid do next? It pops up and says, great, you've now saved the water, now over here. And so I'll go and I'll start to line it out. And so my life kind of lives, and I bet a lot of these will attest that my life lives in spreadsheets of dialogue, things like that. So I'll go through, I'll write kind of my first pass, and then in that pass, we very well might encounter something like, oh, it actually would make more sense if you had another NPC right here, because then they could say something that was acted upon previously, or they could hint towards this, or that main character that we had at the beginning of their intro, they could get them to show up at the end so they can report on something. And so I kind of get to go back to the designers and I get to say, hey, it would really help me out a lot if you could do X, Y, and Z, which would accommodate it. And usually, if it's not a major thing or like a game-breaking thing, unless it has to be a specific way, normally, I make my case and I say, I think it should be this way. And they say, that's a really good case, you're a really awesome writer. They do say that, believe it or not. And so then after that, after we kind of have that rough outline, it's then just a matter of going back 2 or 3 times, playing it out, getting other people to play it who have never seen it before. And what I'll do is when I have other people play the game, I'll watch their eyes and I'll watch their facial expression, because inevitably you'll have something that sounded really good when you were writing it, and you're like, yes, this makes total sense to me because I'm the one writing it and I know all the background knowledge. But then to a person they'll be like, what's staircase? You've never mentioned a staircase before. I've never seen a staircase. I'm like, oh, it's the staircase that you're gonna get to. And so you kind of have to overcome obstacles like that and be like, oh, that makes sense. So in a short answer to a very long-winded answer, the process is very fluid and very full of iterations, each one hopefully improving. Anybody else? He asked me specifically, so I don't know if he wants to know anybody else's process.
Yeah, I think really quickly, I totally agree with Adam that iteration for me is the biggest part of my process. So the first thing I have to do is, I'm a big fan of word vomit. You just start typing and get a draft out there, because it's so much easier to fix something. You can spot the problems in your writing, at least for me, a lot quicker than I can figure out the perfect sentence. And I think the other important thing that Adam mentioned is that you're not only writing dialogue, but that dialogue can be usable. It's sometimes informative, or you're just writing tooltips. here's what this does. And so getting it out quickly means you can get more eyes on it, you get a chance to review it, and people can test it. So yeah, really it's lots of drafts, lots of iteration, and just trying it out. And eventually something sticks. But it can be a long time.
And sometimes, yes. And then also, a lot of the web would help me very often, and our main platform is and you would write it out, and then you would put it in the game, and then you would open the game, open it, and you would read every text, and you would have to make sure that situationally what you wrote in your head in the Excel sheet actually matches the situation in the game, and so often it doesn't, and then you sit there and you type a word over here and build the game again, and then I put it in here and I'm like, oh, it works, or well, it doesn't work. And so it's iteration and build and iteration, and so much of that when you're the only writer. It's just in your head. It's just like, oh, you can do better at this kind of thing.
It's very self.
Yeah.
You come back like a week later and you're like, who wrote this crap? Oh, I wrote this crap.
My processes are doing with students.
Corinne does bring up a good point, though. As kind of the boss within her realm, there's going to be a lot of stuff that writer would want. Okay, how many of you are either writers or want to be writers or view yourself as writers? Yeah, a large, and I think it would be safe to say, because I am one, we all have very big egos. And we all think that we either have created or we will create the most perfect thing that's ever existed. And there's going to be a lot of times when that's not the case. Either because A, it's just not very good, or B, because it can't fit within whatever kind of, we can't afford a 10-minute cutscene expressing the emotions between these two characters because it's in the middle of an action sequence. So everything you want to say, you have to say in 30 seconds. Go. And so you do kind of, there is a large degree, depending on the circumstances, there is a large degree of trying to make what you want fit into what you have, whether that be time constraints or technology constraints.
You go throw your bag away, you look hungry.
So the question was, if you have a student who is looking to get into games and things like that, and who is on the English track, what would you recommend? And I think Corinne will answer that question.
Well, I mean, I hate to be the pressure of dreams, but I frequently have to have these conversations with our students. Part of the reason why, we have the #2 game development program in the country right now, and we don't have a game writing track because we typically, and this has been true for game designers as well, is the game industry doesn't hire writers, doesn't hire designers straight out of school. And so what we usually tell people, and this certainly, Adam is actually an exception to the rule here. My phone's ringing. It's going to serenade me while I talk to you. The problem is that there are very few of these positions out there, unless you go to huge studios, and they typically what they do is they grow designers or they grow writers, and so you've got to have another skill. So you've got to get into the game industry, and you've got to get into a company, and you've got to show that you're a good employee, and that you can move around inside of that company and become valuable to something else. And that's most of the people that I know that are writing have done that, and designing as well. And so I teach a game writing class. I teach it at the graduate level and at the undergraduate level, but it's brand new. And we don't have any intention of ever giving someone a degree in it. If you want to get a degree, you should get an English degree, because the fundamentals of writing are taught in the English degree. So they're fantastic. There's a very, very good I'm slightly prejudiced. Yes. But I do think that it's the fundamental thing you have to keep in mind is keep trying. It's not like this is a no-win situation, but you have to keep developing your craft. If you think about it, if you get a Bachelor of Arts, this is a craft that you have to practice, and you have to practice all the time. And that the better you are, the more you write, you send things out and you apply for jobs, and for the game industry, you make more games, you have more to show, and you have it. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that's the best chance you have. This is really what you want to do. So, dream big.
And my one addition to that would be, and this is not, if anyone has any aspirations of getting into the video game industry in any sphere, the magical 3 words are learn to code. Because, especially the way that the industry is turning more and more, people are wearing a lot of hats. There's not just, your exclusive. Again, with big companies, there's going to be writers, and that's all they do. That's what I was hired on in my company, but even then, I took on a number of other roles to the point where my official position was writer. And so, with that being the case, everybody needs people who know how to code. And so, if you do want to get in, whether it be with writing, whether it be with art, whether it be whatever, your resume will look 10 times more impressive if you know some scripture.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly add to that. One of the great benefits of learning to code is that then you can start making games before you work at a company. Because my job title is not writer, I'm a game designer. And that's what I was hired to do. But I actually first interviewed at my company to be an office gopher. But on my resume I had working towards game design, and when they asked if I had a portfolio, I had a portfolio of Halo maps and expansions I've written for tabletop RPGs and board games I've made. None of it was AAA stuff, but I had done some, I was putting forth work and effort and knew something about making games, so that I had what I needed to when the opportunity came to then show that, you actually can write, you actually can work on games. So absolutely, if someone's not going to give you the experience, go out and make your own, and write in your games that you make, and you'll start that process before anybody ever hires you.
What is the difference between writing inside the game industry compared to the movie industry compared to book acting?
Okay, so the question was, what's the difference between writing for games, writing for movies, and writing books? Probably
There's a ton of different things and a ton of things that are the same. The biggest difference that I found, when you write a screenplay normally, you sit down and you are the writer of the screenplay. So you write everything that you want about the character. The character development, the story development, and all the ideas are your ideas, and you pour your heart, your soul, and everything into this thing, and then you send it away, and you hope for the best. That's if you're starting. If you're a screenwriter and have 10 under your belt, and then studios come to you to doctor scripts and stuff, it's a little different. But let's go from there. When you're a game writer, you are a person on a team normally, and what happens when you're on a team is that you begin writing maybe the same way. Here's my story, here's my characters, here's everything I want to develop, and you give that over to the team, and then, a week later it comes back, we love this, except we're cutting this character, we can't have this feature, we just heard back from marketing that you have to change the environment because France doesn't like that environment, like things like that. So you're like, okay, let me change everything. I think that one of the biggest complaints you hear people talk about when they talk about game writing versus film writing is that games feel shallow. and that there isn't a lot of great development going on, and you don't have these sweeping story arcs that resolve nicely and are pretty. And I assure you 100% every writer who sat down to write that game wrote those in there. But what happened, when the father came back, at the end of the game to resolve the whole conflict that the game was about, they didn't have enough, Hollies to make the father. So you're like, oh crap, now I have to rewrite the whole arc to reflect that. And so things get more general and it feels more shallow. So a huge part of the difference between film and games is that I noticed that games also, in the film business, you write a script and it might go through 15 other people. Hardly ever does it. Are you one of those people in that line? You kind of write it, then you give it over, and then you're like, bye, I hope you're okay. Later. In games, like most game writers that I know, they're part of the team, and you stay until you ship that game, and you write in parallel to making the game. And so, I don't know if that's a plus or a minus.
Well, I think it could be. So one thing that I've noticed, because I have a little bit of screenplay experience, is that I would say with video games more than either film or novels or short stories, you're probably getting the most requests for change. Because studios will come back, movie studios, and they'll be like, you can't, it now has to be a romantic comedy. But with video games, it will seriously be. So the very first game I ever worked on was a little industry secret. They were once upon a time, about 6 years ago, they were making a Die Hard game for Xbox 360 and PlayStation, and it was gonna be awesome. It never found its way. And so I got brought on right at the beginning of that project, and they basically said, okay, if you know a lot about Die Hard, and they said, if you were to make a Die Hard game, or a Die Hard storyline, so I can outline it out loud. And I was like, and then we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. And they said, okay, the very first thing is we have to start thinking about this in terms of levels. Right? Okay, so this is the bridge level, this is the warehouse level. And so because how Amy said, it's this whole team effort, you're going to get a lot of questions back that are based off of other people's work. It's not other people's work. It's not like you get to write something at the beginning and everybody. It's to, okay, this is the Bible that we're now going to use to make our game. It's, no, we're going to go do this. Or, you'll come to work after a weekend and one of your producers will be like, okay, so I went to the Grand Canyon this weekend and we need to have our character. And you're like, it's an action movie that takes place, or an action game that takes place in New York. Well, how about if there's a museum that has a Grand Canyon museum? And you'll get things like that, and that's not too far out of
Exactly
reality.
the same, Adam. What do you mean?
And you'll get things like that, and so I'm not saying that it's kind of like you have to do this tough, but it very much is we have these restraints, or we have these requests, or the art would look a lot cooler if the warehouse was all of a sudden a museum. So then you have to go back, and you have to stay, again, as Amy said, you're staying with this project, so now you have to go back, and you have to say, okay, why is this guy now in a museum? In a warehouse, it makes sense, because that's where they store their weapons. So who's storing weapons in the museum? Oh, okay, well maybe the villain actually has a public face, that he's actually a philanthropist. And so there's oftentimes where you're going back and you're tweaking a lot of stuff, not due to just the empty requests of producers, but because the artists have created something where the game mechanic has changed. And so they're, okay, now we have to figure this out. So I would say the biggest difference between those realms is the fact that you're going back, because you're only one cog, you have to turn just as easily as everybody else in the machine, or else you're going to break it. So you're going to be doing a lot of rewriting and a lot of creation of stuff based off of what other people have already done or whatever.
Adam, so when on the first catch-up, so I was hired at EA as a producer, and I knew how to write too, because I had my degree and I had this film background, and so it worked out nicely for me. But we made the first catch-up game as this totally open world sandbox with no text, because we're like, it's text. You don't need to have text. These are little kids, they're not going to read it anyway. So what are you going to, and so we got they made the game, spent all the time making the game. It's awesome. And we get to the like 3 weeks after alpha when we're on an accelerated cycle, so we're almost at beta, and they do some playtests, and they're like, "Oh, the girls don't know what to do." So we need to put in goals. And we're like, great. So then they started thinking, what are some goals that you can put in? And so they just started putting in very, like, play on this week. Here's some plans. And they put that, and they're like, oh, the little girl, it's not compelling and it's not engaging. And they're like, so Amy, just write a story that incorporates all of these
Just
goals, for the whole game and for these 40 characters. But you can't, we're not going to animate them specially because we're done. So you can't show them. Yeah, and they're genderless. So you can't use any pronouns like he or him or she or her. And the kids name them, and pets don't talk anyway. So make sure you're careful about. And so that literally, it was me going, I've never written a game before. I wrote it, the first script in Final Draft, which is strange because that's what I knew. And then I'm like, oh, it needs to be in Excel. And so it was just like, put it on top of this stuff that we already made and turn it into a story. Luckily, it worked for us. And the second game became all about story because we found out that that was what the demographic really loved and really wanted. And so the second and third games were all about that. And so it was all about big things in reaction.
Are you raising your hand or are you stretching?
Well, I think I'm just going to add, because you asked about the books, the differences in the books, and I have this conversation with my students a lot, is that when you're writing a book, it's your own little perfect creature, right? You get to have complete control of the whole process from start to finish. And it's much like if you think about a fine artist versus a production artist or a graphic artist. The graphic artist usually has a client, right? And a fine artist is usually pleasing themselves. And so if you can't make that big, you can't really be a game writer unless you're in your basement, or your mom's basement, doing that coding, doing that creation on your own. It just doesn't work the same way. You've got to be able to work in a team, and you've got to be able to iterate constantly. I often say it's like if you don't like a puzzle, if you don't like to solve puzzles, then you can't really be a game writer because you're constantly given puzzles. And it's actually one of the things I love the most about writing games, is that I'll have students come to me and where they're way down the road and realize that something's going wrong with the story that they come up with when they're reading or something like 6 months ahead. And they have to talk through about why they've made decisions, and it's a puzzle and it's fun, but it's also a lot of work, but it's not this precious little thing that a book can be. That's
Originally said.
So a couple of you have mentioned that you use Excel to manage your writing process. I'm wondering what it is that Excel brings that more like writing to a lifetime draft. Might be missing writing drive or writing.
Yes, Malcolm.
The question was why write or why keep your writing in Excel as opposed to like Word or Final Draft or something like that.
I don't think that's your choice.
It's often not your choice, and also organization. Because think of something like a game like Fallout, where you have a dialogue tree. You have, this is my initial statement, but then depending on what they say in response, I can say one of these two things. But if I get too far down this path, I now can't go back over this option. And keeping track of that in something like Word would be really good. As opposed to like using that in Excel, you just A, B, C. And then like Amy says, a lot of software will say, I need all these strings, I need all these bits of text, where do they all live? And you say, okay, this is in some of these.
And when I write, I write it in Final Cut first, and just so I can see the flow, and I can see, because that's what I'm used to. And then, over the years, you'll learn tricks, work from Final Draft to Excel in a manageable way.
I wouldn't think any of us actually write in Excel. I think it's more of a organizational thing.
Yeah, no, I use Google Docs That's all I do.
Flux is the best thing to do.
Yeah, and then it ends up in Excel because, like we said, you can spit it out into something the game can read. And so at the end, like if I've written a nice, novel, box or whatever, it'll end up being string code, English text, Chinese text, Japanese text, and Excel. Excel's like those sort of things. You can tell I'm a writer now, right?
And when you're a writer, or the writer on the team, when the writing is your responsibility, that normally means that you fix the text bugs too. And going through a document and finding text bugs is a lot harder if it's not in.
So the question was, how is the communication between departments as everyone is collaborating? And I'll start, I guess, and then it can be great. It oftentimes is not. I'm going to speak in broad strokes here. Programmers are very literal people. And so if you don't have anything, if you don't have every single thing spelled out, and it's not that they're incapable of it, it's just like, this is what I have to do, right? Like there's the old joke about a programmer's wife sends him a text and she says, will you pick up a gallon of milk on the way home? And if they have 6, can you get some eggs? And he comes home with, I remember it. Son of a gun. I apologize. But anyway, so the idea is, and so programmers will often then turn around and say like, you'll come up to them and you'll say, why doesn't this happen? And they'll be like, tell me to. And then on the complete flip side of that, artists are, generally speaking, very much like, the sky is the limit and I'm going to paint this wonderful something or other. It's like, well, you need to keep a polycount down. It doesn't matter. And so, Corinne had mentioned design and writing usually are very much in line with each other. You'll often find that writers are designers are writers. And of course, this is going to sound very self-serving, but design is kind of the middle ground of those two, not in terms of rationality or reasonability, but in just terms of trying to keep everything in check. Because the programmer's only job is to program, the artist's only job is to create something. The writer's job is to be like, okay, or the designer's job is to be like, okay, how can we keep those, how can I take advantage of each side, right? So I don't want to crush anyone's spirits, I'll leave that to others, but generally speaking, if you're working with good people, it's very, very good. I would say if you do get into the industry and you do become any position, get to know your coworkers as people. So that way you do have to approach them with a problem or a concern or anything like that when you talk about them as adults, rather than, and then I'll sit down and smile with
Absolutely, and I think along with that, you learn how to talk with this programmer versus this artist and what they, how they work, and you'll know, okay, if I need this character to, so I have this character, I've written this dialogue, I know where they're going to be in level 2, I know it needs to happen here. You'll begin to understand how a programmer would build it and how an artist would need to build it, and so you'll be able to tell them in those terms what you're going to need. I think that's, I haven't written for a lot of other mediums, but something about games is that as you're writing it and then it's in your head, someone else is going to build it and make it happen. And so when Anna was talking about the middle ground, that's where I find myself a lot, is the programmers have built something that works, the artists have built something that looks great, and then I need to put it together and make sure it all plays right. So I had some other wonderful points that have decided to float away to another conference. But yeah, so I'll leave it there.
You know, there's a tool that writers have. So I was a producer, and producers do a lot of that communicating between making sure the engineers and the artists and the designers are working with business and people and just all that. But as a writer, what's in you that makes you a writer is fantastic at inspiring your team to get on board with your idea, right? Because it's almost unfair, the advantage that a writer has to manipulate somebody into seeing their vision, right? It's a skill that we have as writers. You have to use that when you make video games because, and I find that you get a much better product at the end because now the engineer's heart is in it and his brain. The artist, their heart and their and their brain. So you get to be the person that can really compel those people to feel for your characters and your story and your moment and even your players, right? So you use that and you use your gift of inspiration on your own team and then they come together and they build this great thing, right?
Conversely, on that note, though, writing in video games, as we kind of know it, is a relatively new concept. I see a lot of people out here who are relatively my age. We think of games when we were younger, there wasn't a lot of story to be said, or if there was, it was some really weird, like, you guys ever played Arkanoid, the campaign? It's like your spaceship has been sucked into a portal, and you're like, then why am I bouncing balls off of it? And so it's still a relatively new thing. And so to kind of offer just a counterpoint to Amy, by virtue of it being kind of one of the newer disciplines in games, writers often find themselves on the low end of the totem pole just because people don't know how to act around them. Like how she said, can you just throw a story in there? You know, and someone will say that because it's like, well, I don't know how long it takes to write a story. I know how long it takes to make an environment. I know how long it takes to program a minigame, but I don't know how long it takes to write a story. And so there is that as well, that oftentimes it really is, I don't want to say unreasonable, but there are requests made that in 20 years, it'll be a totally different ballgame anyway, but it's definitely, okay, good. This is my theory.
Not only that, but people say, why would you write for video games anyway? Because people don't read what you write in video games. It doesn't matter. Nobody reads it. And we're gathering information to have that proved actually. People do read. That's actually why they play the games. And the good stories, they don't even realize that they're
Well,
real.
the outcry at the end of Mass Effect 3, now they talk about statistics that people actually don't finish games, and then the big, huge, long games, right? You know, so everybody talked about Last of Us as being, this pinnacle game, and it's an okay story, but it's got a lot more going for it than a lot of other games that we've seen. So we're making progress, but there's still a long way to go, and that's because we have writers that are part of the process. Some of you can do that.
Just keep in mind really quick, the writing isn't just what people read on the screen.
No.
Think of a game like Portal 2.
Right.
And think about the entire progression of that entire game. That all came from a writer. I had said I would do something like that. It was useful.
I wanted to ask, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like the Souls series, like Dark Souls and Demon Souls, but I wanted to ask what do you think about the way they tell the story, and if you're familiar with that series?
So the question was, what are our opinions on the story in Dark Souls and Demon Souls? I am not privy to that series, so I can't speak.
Yeah, I've only played it for a few minutes and started pretty mercilessly. I didn't have too familiar either. Although, sorry. Okay, although I will say from what I've seen of Dark Souls, and it's kind of the point that's been, I think, floating in the background of a lot of things we've said, is Dark Souls and games like it. I think if you look at a screenshot of Dark Souls, you watch a Let's Play for 5 minutes, you're gonna get a lot of, even if you don't have the specific narrative, right? Like I know there are a lot of like gods and mythology built into the game, but there's also a lot of tone and other parts of the narrative that are communicated by aspects that aren't written or voiced, but that's part of the narrative as well, which is, so that's an interesting thing where as a writer, you might not, like if you're writing a novel, if you were writing Dark Souls, you would be describing the environments and the tone tone, the sound, or whatever you need to convey the emotion that you need to. But as a writer, you may only be writing the dialogue, but other parts are creating that narrative as well. So when you talk about a vision, if everybody's on board with the vision, it's all going to work together. If people aren't, then so if the person writing Dark Souls and creating the mythology knew exactly what they were making, and the artist came back with something totally different, like a really cell-shaded, bright, rainbow-colored environments, it'd be like, this is totally not what I want. It's working against what I've written. So I guess this is not an answer to your question, but I do think that one thing Dark Souls does well is it leads its narrative into its environments and settings and mechanics as well to help tell the story that the writers have created.
We have 10 minutes left, so this is going to be the lightning round. So ask the questions quick, and we'll have one person answer as quick as they can. You, sir.
Is there
As it is a new medium, is there a strategic method to present yourself as a writer?
My only advice would, or my number one point of advice would be, if you have examples of things you've done that would fit into a game, that's going to be a much better presentation than anything else. So, and look at the company and what kind of work that they do. So if you want to write Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons and Dragons, write something that looks like a supplement or a character description or an adventure. If you're going to write for Naughty Dog, say, okay, have something other than just the dialogue. So it's like, here's the dialogue and here's how it fits in. It's a point in the story where we've just gone through this big set piece, or the player is about to go into this segment where they'll learn this new mechanic or something. Like, maybe that's a weird example, but honestly, thinking in terms of how games work and the kind of games you want to write for and the kind of games that people who are going to hire you are going to make, they're not only interested in your talent as a writer, but could they actually build this? Do they understand how it works so that they can talk to artists and programmers and things like that? So context.
On The Sims, we have actually hired people from the community of Sims who we see are talented writers who get the brand, who understand if there's something you love, write it, put it out there, let people become a voice for that franchise or that game, and people will notice. That's what I would say.
Get involved in the local independent game, or IGDA.
Yeah.
Is it independent? No, it's International Game
Developers
Developers
Association.
Yeah, I can say that word. International Game Developers Association. You can get connected with other people who are maybe making games, and you can get some experience writing for those games. You can donate your time. People who, there's lots of people in the local industry that are there that are willing to look at resumes, give you advice. We have a rich community here of game developers, big studios, small studios, and that's a great place to start. And it's igda.org, I believe.
Yeah.
There's a Utah chapter. Yeah.
I always repeat the questions, but can everyone in the back hear the questions in their ask?
no?
What would our example of a game that has a very good balance between good gameplay and good story, so they're not misbalanced? I've already said mine, which is Portal 2. So I'll let somebody else know.
I'll give you a quick example, and it's comparative. It's BioShock and BioShock Infinite, where both of which I think have really great narratives. Like, if you took just the story out and you could make it into a movie, a TV show, a book, and it would be great. But I think that BioShock had, what I was saying earlier about the other elements as well as the narrative fit together to really make that story pop and work. Everything you did mechanically in the game fed into the story, so that when they had big story revelations and moments, you're like, that was great. This is just all, I'm in this great experience. That's what a game is, it's an experience. Whereas Bioshock Infinite, I felt had really great story moments and really great gameplay, but they didn't always mesh. I felt sometimes you were playing the game and then you got some great stories back and forth. So that would be my quick comparative example of the two. Yeah.
All right, we have time for two more.
Brothers, Tale of whatever, wait. what is it?
Two sons.
Brothers, Tale of Two Sons.
Yeah, that. Play that.
We have time for two more questions, and then I think a bunch of us will be available afterwards. So, Banner.
As you mentioned, in addition to writing, it's probably a good idea to start coding and whatnot. What's the best way to go about learning how to code?
Code.org.
Code.org?
Linda. Lynda.com too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to say that was the official.
Oh.
There are a million. There's Linda. There's Code. There's a bunch of different YouTube.
The University of
how-tos.
Utah.
You can go take classes. You can also. There are a number of people nowadays who are self-taught. They just pick up Unreal or Unity or Flash, and they just find some YouTube videos. They find some online tutorials. It's something that is, if you have the drive to do it, there are unlimited number of resources on the internet, which makes it pretty cool.
And not everybody can code.
I don't code. I never code. I can't even.
And please, Adam, they're right. If you can do it, great. If you can't, please don't think all hope is lost. Okay? It's just, some people just don't get, you just don't have that brain. It's okay. The game industry is open for all of us. I can do it, I hate it. So it's fine.
And there are lots of other tools that will help you make games that aren't just coding.
Absolutely.
Like if you can use RPG Maker or Game Maker, do it. Just make something. Like that's the cool part. So once you're making so if coding is keeping you from making something, don't worry about it. If something is comfortable for you to make something in, use it. Great. It doesn't matter.
Last question.
So, you always have these big, like, Save the Universe games, and that animated story compelling. So, how do you make this a super small,
The question was, if it's not a Save the Universe game, how do you make a small-scale game compelling?
Play Brothers, the Tale.
One thing that they always teach you in any kind of writing class is that they'll say, when something is occurring, if it's like a movie, it doesn't have to make sense to anybody, it just has to make sense to the character. And so think of a game like Braid, where the entire game is just about a guy trying to find his girlfriend. That's not a Save the Universe story, but it's about a guy wanting something. So I think it's really, really easy. I think the hard part of it is, finding a scenario is easy. I think the hard part is selling it as a game. Because there's a million Save the Universe games, and we're like, everything's going to blow up, and you're like, I don't know.
Aristotle talked about, sorry, I just sound like I work in university. Aristotle talked about in poetics, about the things that make something important. Anyway, talk about spectacle. We do spectacle. Have you seen Transformers? It's all spectacle, no story, right?
Yeah.
So AAA games are really good at spectacle. There's a lot of games out there, especially independent games right now, that are doing the other things really, really well. So you can find those.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up. Thank you all for coming. I think we'll all just step out, and if you guys continue to have questions,